So, good morning. I think we will start our session. So, welcome to our thematic session. During the next 2 hours, we will explore novel tools and technologies to tackle these current challenges in invasion science. And to do that, we have a panel of 7 experts that will share with us their knowledge and their views about these challenges. My name is Joana Vicente. I'm from CBEO in Portugal, that is the Research Center in Biodiversity and Genetic Resources, and I'm the group leader of the Invasion Science group there.
And I'm Eva. I'm a PhD student at CBU, also at the Invasions group.
So for the plenary talk, we have Toke Oye, sorry about the pronounce, and he is an ecologist working at Harters University with 20 years of experience with ecological monitoring and more lately the development of image-based monitoring methods. Thank you so much, Toke.
Thank you. What do I do then? Do I just press next? Or?
I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Great. Well, thanks for showing up. Good morning, everyone. I'm Toke Høyer. I work at Aarhus University in Denmark, and as Joanna just said, we work a lot with ecological monitoring, maybe not so much with invasion biology, but I'll try to talk to you today about how we use sensors and develop sensors for monitoring that could be relevant also in the context of invasion biology. So to fly in, when we talk sensors, we talk about a lot of different things, and each of these sensor types have their own characteristics, like certain aspects they're particularly good at detecting or describing the morphology of certain taxa. And among all of these, one of the most scalable, because they are quite cheap, sensors are the digital cameras, and that's really where we do most of our works with ways of using these essential computer eyes to observe the environment instead of human eyes. So I'll talk to you about two projects today, and one of them is more on the tool development side, and the other one is more on the implementation at large spatial scales. So the first quick presentation is of the Mambo project, which I coordinate and does development of tools for species and habitat monitoring, and it uses particularly cameras as an approach to observe both the plants and vegetation, but also animals, and in particular insect camera traps is one focal point, and the use of images for acquiring plant species list. So you could essentially imagine you take photos of your plant quadrats and get entire species list from those photos. Yeah. So the other project that I'll spend most of the time on is a project under the auspices of the EU partnership Biodiversity Plus. And Biodiversity Plus, for those who don't know it, is an ERA network project, partly funded by the European Commission and partly by national authorities' own budget for biodiversity monitoring. And it covers most of Europe and also some countries outside of Europe. And when it comes to monitoring in particular, there's both a focus on the harmonization of monitoring protocols and the implementation of novel technologies, the use of monitoring data, and particularly on the implementation in these monitoring pilots that across this large geographical scale tries to trial out standardized protocols for monitoring in species and habitats in particular, and that includes invasive alien species. So overall, the Biodiversity Plus project is a good way to connect new technologies to the authorities in in countries that already do monitoring. So at the moment, there are 5 of these pilot projects ongoing in Biodiversity Plus, each of them with about 10 partner countries, so they're fairly large scale. And one of them is focused on invasive alien species. And for this pilot in particular, we're trying to increase the coverage of data and bridge some of the taxonomic gaps. Right. We're in the middle of that project, and we've been collecting data for the past couple of years, and we're just beginning to process some of the results. I'll speak to you about the details of how these data have been collected, what are the perspectives, and what are early findings of that. So there are 2 main modules in this pilot program that has 11 partner countries involved. Fortunately not the UK, but we're leading it from Denmark, and it has partner countries from Sweden to the Azores and over to Bulgaria and Israel. There are 2 modules, and one is focused on fitting cameras to cars and doing roadside vegetation monitoring for invasive alien plant species that are spreading along transport infrastructures. And the other is on insect camera trapping, where we build on existing technology, these automated monitoring of insect traps, the AMI traps. So why are we doing that with these image-based methods? We hope that we can shorten the time from an observation is made until that information is made accessible to managers and policymakers, so that we can more quickly take action and therefore have a higher chance of dealing with new establishment of invasive species. We also believe that with the sensor approach, we capture both the presences and the absences, so we have a more standardized way of understanding when did colonization happen and how fast is a population spreading. And once the infrastructure to analyze images is in place, I wouldn't say it's cheap or I wouldn't say it's free, but it's a fairly cheap way of collecting data, because you can essentially run large amounts of data through imaging pipelines. And both of those technologies have already been tested at national scale, so we're really more working with the implementation phase of this technology. And as I said, we have 11 countries involved with this pilot. So I'll go a bit more into detail about the 2 modules. You may not all be familiar with the practice of monitoring vegetation with cameras fitted to cars, but actually it has been trialed out also in past projects, both in Denmark and in Switzerland. So this digital SLR camera was in operation for a couple of years in Switzerland. And the idea is basically that if we can get this to work, then you could fit cameras to cars that are servicing road networks anyway, road authorities might be monitoring signs or debris on the road, and if they're driving these roads anyway, why not fit a camera to them and get the data to recurrently monitor the location and spread of plants and potentially other organisms that you can observe from a car driving these roads. And the other element is that many species, they actually expand their ranges by following transport infrastructures. So it's also quite a relevant area to monitor. But you can probably imagine that filming plants on a highway with high speed is challenging, and your normal phone camera or hobby camera might not actually allow you to take photos when you're driving at high speed. So we build these systems with very special cameras that are a little more expensive, but that actually allow us to take sharp images even at driving speeds up to 110 kilometers an hour. And at least for this early phase of this work, we're implementing a remote control, so the co-pilot in the car can actually help tag sections of this road where there might be certain species observed. So we have a little bit of guidance in the early stages of reviewing the performance of models and to also more quickly get training data for particular species. So in the end, obviously, it's assumed that this can run automatically, but it's helping us in the early stages to get training data. And for this particular module, we've teamed up with PlantNet, which is an initiative to identify plants from images, and maybe many of you know about the application that you can download on your smartphone. The underlying infrastructure is also possible to use with these road recorded images, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. The PlantNet API allows us to classify among more than 50,000 images or 1,000 species of plants worldwide. Clearly, most of those plant species cannot be identified from an image taken from a car. So here's one of those images taken from a car driving in Denmark. And it's not the full resolution of it, but you can probably tell that even at this driving speed, it's fairly visible. And you can maybe, if you know the giant hogweed, you can see that it's actually quite visible in this image. So in order to adapt the analysis pipeline to this particular domain of landscape scale images, we cut the image into small tiles, and we submit then each of these small elements of the image to the PlantNet classification algorithm, and then we summarize all of that. So we have these little tiles in different sizes, because sometimes the plant might be in the foreground, sometimes it may be in the background. So that's all running automatically to give us multiple of these predictions, and for one image you then end up with some kind of polygon as to where did the model say that it's likely that giant hogweed was found in that image. And we can then extract that information and store that in a database. So for those who are keen on analysis pipelines, this is the diagram. Basically, over to the left, we upload the data to a storage facility, and then we write the images to a database. And once the images are indexed in the database, we submit to this pipeline where we convert the files and call the API, this classifier from PlantNet, get a response back, and then write that to our own database once we're happy with it. And we haven't pushed any of this data to GBIF yet, but the idea is that we can then get the data to GBIF so it's accessible for everyone. We're also working with the ESIN, the European Unit for Invasive Alien Species, to make it available through their database systems. Okay, so at the moment we are beta testing a viewer that allow us to see all these this information on a map. So if you're interested, I'm happy to share the link to it. It's not that posh and nicely looking yet, but at least it allow us to put the detections on a map. And you can zoom in to this, in this case, a small location in Slovakia near Bratislava, where you can see the individual location of the images. And when you click on the dot, you can actually get to the image, and you can review whether the prediction actually seemed to make sense. So we will build more functionality into this and user interaction. So hopefully this could become like a European-wide tool for monitoring the location and spread of relevant invasive alien species. So maybe some of these are no longer really managed in certain parts of Europe, like the Tree of Heaven is very widespread in Southern Europe, but in places like Denmark, we haven't really realized that's a big problem. So it might be relevant to see where that's establishing and spreading in places like Northern Europe. Okay, so to the other module, the insect module, we're building on existing technology, this AMI trap that we've then distributed out to these 11 partners. we know much less about insects and which ones are actually considered or should be considered invasive, and they're often mixed up with pest species. And we don't really have AI tools that work out of the box. The ones that you know from iNaturalist and others are not really quite adapted to the purpose of analyzing images from insect camera traps. So as part of a bigger international effort, we are trying to build processing pipelines. We can't just rely on a collaboration like we do with PlantNet. But this broadly consists of 3 different approaches: one to detect the insects, one to broadly classify them, and one to identify those insects that can be identified down to species level, like particularly macro moths. And again, we built this pipeline where the users can actually just upload their data, and in the future, probably the traps themselves will upload this data, and then you actually run it through these different deep learning models, and you can more or less instantaneously get your information back on which species were found on that trap at that location. So if anything new comes up, you might get very quick response on where and when that happened, and you can maybe even go and sample the site to verify that indeed it was not a mistaken trivial species. And again, we hope to push this to GBIF. Building something that detects insects cannot, I can't overemphasize how challenging that can be. Maybe this helps you. It's actually, this is the result of a lot of long days in the office for my PhD student that developed this tool to automatically localize and segment lots of images, lots of insects in very busy images. So that's a great achievement and part of this project, and something that we hope to bring also to other projects. And for the broad classification, it's become really clear that this is not just a trap to monitor moths that we thought maybe in the beginning. So actually, if you look on these colors over here, the moths make up these pink salmon-colored parts of the bar charts here. So most of the insects that we see at these traps are actually not Lepidoptera. And among those, there are also both interesting species in terms of conservation relevance and certainly also pest management. Finally, we don't, like PlantNet, have a global scale classifier that can help us classify all these species. I know there are some out there, and we also try these out, but say, for instance, this palm moth, which is one that is becoming increasingly of concern in Southern Europe, only has 3 images indexed in GBIF, so it's very hard to train a classifier based on publicly available data. So for some taxa, we probably need to supplement these databases. Yeah, but this is data coming straight out of the analysis pipeline, and these are not invasive insect species, but it's just to show you how finely resolved the data that we can get out of these camera traps are, and how it can actually tell us, well, maybe trivially something about their phenology, but given that these are not vetted, they haven't been through expert evaluation, you can see that actually it's not like random when these species are detected. So it gives confidence in the accuracy of these models, and I find it quite interesting that we can get to this level of detail. And for certain species, well, you might argue the box tree moth is not an invasive species. I think there's a bit of discussion about that, but that's one species that our model actually does pick up very, very well, and it does also provide information about when in the season is this species active. So all of our traps in this project picked up box tree moths, from the Azores to Sweden, and from Belgium to Bulgaria. So that's interesting as well. Yeah, so towards the end, I'm just going to say that these insect camera traps are being deployed not just to monitor invasive alien species, also for other reasons. But I think we can leverage the work that's done in other projects also to get a better grasp of where are these insect species occurring. And as this network becomes denser and denser, I think that could be really important for how we understand the spread and introduction of new insect species to Europe and elsewhere. If you want to know more about, particularly on the insect side, there's a QR code there to the Insect AI Cost Action Network, which is really an open community for those who are entry level into computer vision or to entomology or both. Up in the top right, there's a little commercial. Last year we had this summer school for computational entomology, and we're going to repeat that in the context of Insect AI next year. It's not public yet, but if you follow Insect AI, probably in the next month or two, there will be a call for applicants for a new summer school happening next year. Take-home messages. Well, maybe I didn't get to the bottom of the invasion biological implications of these tools, but at least I hope I showed you that we can actually implement these tools at very large scales, and that they are offering scalability and cost efficiency. They can tackle a wide range of species, and they give us information about both the presence and the absence of the organisms. So hopefully in the future we can have a shorter time period from observation to actionable knowledge for policymakers and managers. Lots of people to thank. I didn't even fit everyone here, and I know maybe this is something we'll continue working on in the coming years. But yeah, lots of people here that I appreciate thanking, and the two projects as well. Thank you.
So for the questions, now we have time to one question from the audience, then we will ask from the virtual community to a question too, and then we'll see. So questions? No. Okay, one there, please.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, you're asking about how can they be implemented in official monitoring or national-led monitoring? Yeah, well, that's a very good question, and in a way, it's a question we're also asking ourselves in the context of Biodiversity Plus, because it really is a partnership of such national authorities. So in one respect, I guess the capacity building is already happening, at least for some countries, and we want to expand that also to countries that might be interested in tagging on to this or applying these methods. So I think capacity building is one future activity that needs to happen. Maybe not so much in the computer science side of things, but in the operational and logistical side of things, protocols and training schools to operate and manage the sensors and apply them in the field. And then one of the strengths of this is that you can centralize the analysis of the data, but that also leaves the question, who is then going to be responsible for that centralized analysis? And that's a discussion that really cannot just happen at the national level. It should, I think, happen at the international level. So for these EU projects, it seems obvious that it's somehow the responsibility of the EU Commission or some of their organizations. But it's not clear. Now this is a pilot project and we don't know what happens after that. So there needs to be some steer on the management of this central data storage, central data management, processing and dissemination. So very good questions.
So next we will take one online. So there's a question about how accurate the identification is and some limitations if there are species that it's not so good to identify.
Like small herbaceous plants or
Yeah.
conspicuous plants.
Yeah, so that's also a fairly big question and obviously very important. And unfortunately, I can't say for every organism how accurate it is. What we've done to validate the accuracy of the plant models, which is maybe what the person is alluding to, is that we have. Well, first of all, I would say most classification models, like deep learning classification models, they give you back some measure of confidence, a value typically scaled to between 0 and 1, and that's a measure of how that class is likely to be the correct class compared to the other classes. And what we typically do is we end up with these values for all of the classes that the classifier knows about, and then we pick the class that gets the highest value. That may not be a 1, but we pick the one that has the highest value. So what we've done with some of these plants is we've then taken images that got predictions with high and medium and low confidence values, and then we manually reviewed those images to check whether they were actually correct or not. And then you end up with like a logistical probability distribution where with low confidence values, typically the species is not there, and with high confidence values, the species is there. And from that inflection point in the logistical regression, you can then assess some threshold where for this particular species, that's the threshold you can apply to say, above this threshold, then the species is typically there. So a bit complicated, but we can't do this for 2,000 species, so we have to approximate that a bit, and we will probably do this by functional traits.
Okay, thank you. You have lots of questions in the app to reply.
Okay,
So
yeah.
thank you for this amazing presentation. Tom.
Great, thank you.
And so next up, our next speaker is Helen Roy. She's an ecologist at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology in the University of Exeter. And she's been working in biological invasions for more than 20 years. And so welcome, Helen.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you to Joanna and Eva for inviting me to be part of this wonderful session. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the IPBES assessment, tell you a little bit about IPBES, and specifically focus on aspects within that assessment around novel tools. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with IPBES, but IPBES is an independent intergovernmental body, and it is essentially the equivalent of the IPCC. So it's the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystems. I don't want to go through all of the kind of makeup of it. Some of you might be aware they have their plenary in session at the moment in Namibia, so you can follow them on LinkedIn or Blue Skies or wherever you get your information. And I would be really delighted to talk to anyone if they're interested in hearing about ways in which you can get involved with the really important work of IPBES. We have had much that's come from one of their earlier assessments, the first global assessment on biodiversity and ecosystem services. There will be the launch, hopefully, of the new second assessment beginning next year. It's just having the scoping document negotiated in plenary at the moment. But one of the many amazing figures that came out of that assessment was this one, which highlights the 5 main drivers of biodiversity loss, including invasive alien species as one of those drivers. So I was really delighted that when in 2019 I was invited to be one of the co-chairs of the BES Thematic Assessment on invasive alien species and their control. And this is some of the amazing team, because then there were about another 200 contributing authors to the assessment. But it was a really amazing experience of 4 years of us working together with experts from around the world, from a whole variety of different disciplines, to bring together data, knowledge, information on invasive alien species and their control to produce the summary for policymakers. And Joanna and I were on a chapter together as well, which was really, really fantastic. So right at the very start, when we began this process with the BES Invasive Alien Species Assessment, we, as the co-chairs, came up with a variety of themes that we wanted to be kind of cross-cutting through the assessment: good quality of life, Indigenous and local knowledge, and scenarios and models. But we also wanted to have some common themes that were kind of a checklist for everyone within the different chapters to be thinking, have we done enough to cover this particular common theme? And technology was one of those particular common themes. I should say all of the chapters are available online, fully laid out, as is the summary for policymakers, and there's a huge amount of information within those chapters. So one of the important parts at the very end of the assessment process is to go before all of the governments. An amazing experience to really see science and policy coming together in a room. We had about 40 hours of negotiation over the summary for policymakers, going line by line, discussing every element with the governments who were in the room, which is more than 140 governments from around the world. But a really unique and amazing experience for me personally. And of course, after those long 40 hours, we were really delighted that unanimously the policymakers approved the assessment that we had collaboratively pulled together. And I just love the photo at the bottom with our coordinating lead authors just looking really joyous at the end of a long process. We then had an amazing flurry of media activity, about 5,000 media items globally, which is also very exciting. But then we've carried on throughout the year, so it's been about a year since the approval just over, to really do a lot of promotion around the assessment and ensure that hopefully it's of use to many people. Just thought I'd include a lovely photo with Joanna here and also one of the other chapter one, Tanya, second in from the left, who I had the absolute pleasure of working with very closely over those 4 years. That was really fantastic. So I thought I'd just give a few headline messages before moving on to the technology aspect. So there's no doubt people and nature are threatened by invasive alien species in all regions of the Earth. We gathered together all of the first records that we could possibly find through the Chapter 2 work. It's about 37,000 established alien species globally, 200 new alien species arriving every year. About 3,500 of this 37,000, there is documented evidence of negative impacts that then defines them as being an invasive alien species. More than 2,300 invasive alien species are found on lands of indigenous peoples across all regions of the Earth. And many of these species, all of them have impacts on nature, but the figure over to the side there is showing how they can have multiple impacts. So some of them will also impact our good quality of life and also nature's contributions to people or otherwise ecosystem services. And when we look at the trends over time, so for all these different taxonomic groups, over time with the number of alien species, we can see all of the lines that are going up in all regions of the world for all of these different taxa. So the threat from invasive alien species is increasing significantly in every region. Islands are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of invasive alien species, and I've been really fortunate with Darwin Plus funding to be working on collaboratively on the UK overseas territories. And globally, 60% of global extinctions are caused by invasive alien species, either solely or working alongside another driver of change. And many of these extinctions are seen on islands. And this is just to highlight that part of the assessment process as well, we produced a variety of fact sheets. So just to summarize to 4 pages some of the information on some specific themes. Within the summary for policymakers, there's lots of kind of headline messages. And one of the headline messages is specifically around tools and technologies, increasing efficiencies with managing biological invasions and controlling invasive alien species. And there's many options emerging. And I think it's really exciting to hear Toka's talk around the computer vision specifically. This is another figure from the summary for policymakers, and technology comes into that as well, and it's really highlighting the need for integrated governance for biological invasions. And of course, the plenary this morning was really inspiring in showing that importance of coherence of policy, community engagement, and integrated governance, and of course, extremely important within the management of invasive alien species. So one of the other aspects that we did within the assessment was to look at knowledge gaps, and we did this in a very structured and systematic way. And then we looked at those gaps in terms of what kind of investment would be needed to fill them, and what kind of difference would they make either to research or to management action. And how long would that investment need to be? And there's a lot of them that come out around technology, around supporting, funding and mobilizing resources for innovation, research and environmentally sound technology. I won't go through all of these, but I'm very happy to share the slides, but certainly developing new solutions through research and technology was seen to be an important aspiration. I've been very excited over the last year through the IPBES assessment to be working alongside the IUCN and with the CBD to produce an invasive alien species toolkit, which takes information from a whole variety of different sources, but including the IPBES assessment, to really make something that's tangible for people to be able to use on the ground, including deploying some technologies around, for example, information systems. One of the projects I've been leading for quite a long time, since 2008, is the GB Non-Native Species Information Portal, and it's DEFRA-funded portal and has a community database behind the scenes, so draws on technology at the sort of databasing level, but also through the alert systems is using a whole variety of technologies, including smartphone apps to deliver an alert system. And many of you would have heard of the Asian hornet, or the yellow-legged hornet, Vespa velutina. It's a species that's a particular concern that could arrive and establish within the UK. So we have a whole variety of technology engaging to be able to detect and to take action very rapidly, including with citizen science. And I won't go through in the interest of time, but we get thousands and thousands of sightings every year of potential sightings of Asian hornets, and there's really quite a handful that turn out to be actual Vespa velutina. This year, I think it's in the region of about 50, but because of the rapid action, then so far they've failed to establish. And actually, we just had a paper out last week in a BES journal, so it's very exciting, where we then also looked at, so where would the Asian hornet be, both in Britain but across EU, if it wasn't for this detection that's going on through, for example, citizen science and this rapid flow of information through data systems, and with the positive message that this rapid action in some regions of the EU is halting the spread of Vespa velutina. So I just want to finish as well with a message of hope. So we summarized the IPBES summary for policymakers into a Nature, Ecology and Evolution paper, and we really wanted to give out a strong message of hope with new tools and technologies, with engagement from people all around the world. Curbing the major and growing threats from invasive alien species is achievable, but it is urgent. And I'm really excited to say that in January, we're about to begin an EU Horizon project with a number of partners, including Quentin Gruen, who's been leading on Botanic Gardens, called One Stop. And it's really going to be about how we can get technologies, like the technologies that Toka described, to the next level, which kind of answers that first question around thinking about how we can get it to the next level where it will be deployable, where it will be useful, and where we will see clear results as an outcome. So just to say thank you all for being here, and thank you for our wonderful organisers for inviting me to be part of this session, and thank you to the various funders. Sorry, my logos have switched all over the place. They were all beautifully laid out, but the technology people in the room did say to me, you've got a very strange sizing going on, so I don't know what I did. Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellen. So we have time for a question here and an online question. So questions? No questions? One question there. They are shy.
Sorry, can you do it?
No, you need to, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen. That was amazing. So you were talking about the gaps. Do you also prioritize the gaps? So what would be the first gap that we need to close?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. So we do prioritise the gaps. So at the end of the summary for policymakers, you can find quite a lengthy table, and there's different circle sizes in that table that show what we thought was the sort of priority of the gap, with bigger circles being the higher priority. And I can't remember, there wouldn't be one that was just definitely at the top, because we were doing it both for science, the value to science, but also the value to management and to action. And but definitely sharing of information would have been very high, and ensuring that there are information systems in place. And I think that somehow or other, sometimes perhaps the sort of databases, perhaps the data flows, the data pipelines are a forgotten part of our technologies that are really, really important. And being able to embed those information systems into all regions of the world would make an enormous difference. So data gaps around, for example, terrestrial invertebrates in tropical areas, on microbes and marine species, these are vast. But having an information system where we can collate that information would definitely be out there at the top. Thank you for that good question.
Any other questions?
Do you see differences between locally invasive species and like species who actually invade from other places? Because we have a lot of time, the situation is that some species are locally becoming very, very big or locally invasive, and is it like, did you see it in your work, like at a different patterns, different trends?
So do you mean in the sense that species that are native to a region, but they become problematic, for instance? Yeah, so throughout our assessment, we were adhering very strongly to the definition of an alien species being one that's been moved from one part of the world to another part of the world where it wouldn't naturally occur by human activity, and that human activity be really important. And then that subset that are problematic, which is about, depends on the taxa, but between 10 and 15% being the invasive alien species. So we would have acknowledged that there are some native species that do cause problems, of course, but we didn't, that wasn't part of our bringing together of information and knowledge. So we really focused on the alien species.
Okay, thank you so much, Ellen.
Thank you very much. So, our next presenter is Michael Pocock. He is an ecologist at UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, interested in the interactions between people, nature and data, especially in exploring best use of citizen science. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. I think you may well have noticed that across the BES conference, citizen science, although it may not have been a primary focus for all that many talks or posters, it keeps cropping up time after time after time and again. And I think there's a high number of talks and studies across all the work that we're hearing about, which relies upon the engagement of volunteers in collecting data and in being engaged in different ways. So I'm going to be talking about that, particularly in the context of invasive species. And most of my talk is going to be based on this paper, which we published earlier on in the year, with some of the other co-authors included in the audience. And so we were thinking about that role of citizen science beyond just maybe the general way in which people think about citizen science. It's well used already, we know this, for early detection and mapping spread of invasive species. But we felt that there was more potential to evaluate impacts and evaluate management using citizen science. So I'm going to go through some of this in a bit more detail now. So, as we know, with invasive species, you get this invasion trajectory with the point of introduction, and then you get the establishment of species. They're spread after a certain lag phase, and then they become established, at which point there's management and there's impacts and things like that. And so at these different evasion stages, there are different management impacts, different consequences, which might be necessary for us to take. And so using some of the work which Pete Brown and others did as part of this cost action on invasive species that we ran for a few years, finished a couple of years ago, and they were looking at citizen science projects across Europe. And so the the spread of different citizen science projects and how they were relevant to these different knowledge needs across the invasion process is shown by the pie charts here. And you can see that, yes, really high proportion of projects are involved in those mapping distributions, often involving the sort of citizen science where anyone can go out and make records wherever they want. And so that's been really effective. And just thinking about citizen science in general, in case you need convincing that it's useful, citizen science, I think, can be this really effective way, a cost-effective way of gathering data at large scale over long time periods as well, and being able to do that in a sustainable way because of the communities who are involved. It's got the potential, as we've heard about, for that rapid data flow to be able to give this sort of information to the people who need it to make decisions. Some of those people might be agencies and regulatory authorities. Some of those people might be the communities themselves who want to take action. It's a tool for engagement, so raising the profile about some of the concerns and the awareness that we need to have about invasive species. But actually, I think many people can feel quite powerless in the face of the big questions about biodiversity crises and things like this, and actually are looking for forms of activism to take. And I think citizen science can be a form of activism and empowerment for people to be able to take. And so as we think about that, we were thinking about different sorts of aspects which are important to consider when using citizen science across this invasion spectrum. So one of the things is about people's motivation for recording, and I think it's really important when we're thinking about citizen science to not just be thinking in that top-down way of what should people be doing for us, but instead thinking about how we can align both the needs which data users might have for those records and those data, but also the motivations of people and how those two can align. And so we were exploring this is based on the sort of expertise which we were able to bring to thinking about this, about how motivation might change throughout that cycle and how it might be influenced by things like publicity. There's also that question of skill. Now, skill is clearly going to vary taxonomically, with particular types of organisms being particularly tricky to identify or to detect. And that can be influenced as well through the sorts of ways in which we design citizen science. And although often we might think about the sorts of records that people can make via apps, smartphones, that sort of thing, of course, actually there are a range of different tools for engaging people with citizen science, and some of that might even be doing things like collecting samples for eDNA detection, or even having certain types of detectors which can be used which don't involve people directly observing and photographing. And we felt that although the needs for IAS policy and management and things like that might be particularly high early on in that invasion stage, where there can be direct action in terms of eradication and containment management, actually that continues on as we think about coping with those invasive species and the management. And I talked about the different sorts of engagement which can be important. So there are some examples of different types of projects from New Zealand, and some of those are more gamified and slightly competitive. The top one is involving school children going out, making records, looking for big things, looking for small things, looking for subtle things like plant diseases as well. So citizen science can be effective right across the range of different invasive species. But thinking about some of those newer uses of citizen science, we feel that there's a lot of potential actually in terms of understanding some of the biology of these organisms, and so thinking about the risk assessment and understanding the sorts of species which might be threats in the future by doing work maybe within their native ranges, things like this. That evaluating the impact of management, actually there's a whole load of community groups and things like that which might be keen on getting involved in thinking about management or doing the management on the ground, actually, how can we harness them and giving them the positive feedback, hopefully, in terms of them also monitoring the impacts of their of the management, and potentially even doing something experimental, exploring the different types of management and how effective they are in different contexts. And I've given a couple of examples of school-based citizen science projects as well. The top one is school children looking at the guts of an invasive lionfish and doing eDNA analysis on that in order to detect, in their case, new prey species. And the other one is looking at parasitoids of the horse chestnut leaf miner and getting school children involved in this sort of way. So it opens it up to so much more than just collecting data. Now, I'm really excited to be able to talk about this paper, which was published yesterday in People and Nature, so really hot off the press. And what we were interested in is saying, well, actually, there's a whole load of citizen science projects, but actually, there's a whole load of recording which goes on under these multi-species recording platforms. So iNaturalist is probably the most well-known global one of them all. And so we were saying, well, actually, are these effective sources of data, almost accidental data, if you like, about invasive species, rather than just the highly targeted projects? And so we got data on nearly 700 first records of species where we had data on both an official first record, that sort of established thing, and by a regulatory authority, and also data from citizen science from one of these platforms. And what we found was that citizen science was 50% of the time, it was earlier to or equal to the official first records. And you can see that the lag time in the graph at the top, even if it was a bit later, it was actually not very much later at all. Earlier records on citizen science tends to come from vertebrates, mammals and birds, as you might expect. Inclusion in the EU priority list for those countries across Europe where we were looking at this. So it shows that that priority list is important in terms of awareness raising, and also if a species had been detected in a neighbouring country, there was that effective awareness raising. There's a lot of causal complexity in why we got these results, and you can read about that in the paper. But broadly, it feels that these sorts of platforms should be an important source of information when thinking about this sort of regulatory sampling and monitoring. So when we think about citizen science, one of the classic things is, well, how do you think about the accuracy of the data points? The other one actually is about the fit for purpose of the data set. And one of the critical things about that is uneven spatial coverage. So I'm not going to go through all of this in detail, but you can read this in that paper that I referenced. That there are a range of different solutions, but one of the solutions for thinking about accuracy is actually using the technology. Toka talked about that. And these sorts of image recognition and things like that can be built into the apps and the smartphones that people use. And PlantNet is one really great example of that. But that example, that second problem, which people tend to dwell less on, I think, in terms of that uneven spatial coverage, there are a range of different possible solutions around this. Some of it is around designing more structured monitoring in order to capture this, be able to capture spread and information more rigorously. Some of it is about using analysis. One of the examples of that is the sort of occupancy detection models, and so being able to cope with that. And so some of us did some work a couple of years ago where we were looking at the Corythuca, the oak lace bug. And so doing the modelling, you can come up with a naive model, whereas if you take account of the density of citizen science records, you come up with a different model, in this case broadly related, but somewhat different. So that importance of analysis. But you can also actually, I think one of the important things is about changing the bias and about how we can inspire and nudge recorders to record in different places and new places on the basis of information which can be given to them in order to take that more risk-based approach to sampling for invasive species. And although I've talked quite a lot in the context of Europe, there is this potential, I think, to use this across the world. This Mapping Invasive Alien Plants project takes place in India. And the importance of co-design then, for thinking about really engaging deeply with the sorts of audiences who may be involved in order to design the sort of citizen science that is fit for purpose. Once again, I'm not going to go through all of this in detail, but I think there can be some really profound ethical implications, particularly of using citizen science in the context of invasive species. You've got this potential conflict. Sometimes I think the motivations are really well aligned, and sometimes actually the consequences of people reporting an invasive species might actually be quite surprised, quite a shock to them. So thinking through some of these ethical implications is important. Actually doing it through co-design is the really effective thing. We're exploring some of this, as Helen's already advertised, through a project which is starting very soon. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Michael. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Okay, 1 question here, please.
Hi, I wonder if you're thinking about the use of social media data to track alien species at all?
So I'm not. I think someone's talking about that later on, aren't they, in this session? Yes. So yeah, I think that sort of thing can be really effective. One of the challenges is that it can be really difficult to disentangle this effect of where people are reporting things versus the different sort of motivations for reporting. And so I think that's something that is important, how people can be influenced by awareness raising positively and negatively in terms of some of this sort of stuff. Maybe one of the other aspects, I suppose there's something about spatial location actually with quite a lot of social data, some of the platforms that are available. But one of the other things is that being able to gather some awareness about concern, and although it might just be one indicator of public concern about things or public awareness of particular issues, I think that can be a great source. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. One more quick question, please.
Quick question, when you said involving school students, I mean, there has been always a challenge of using school students of that category citizens as reliability of the data.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that kind of? I mean, how much percentage of time or resources are going into validating?
So I'm going to not answer that question directly in the interest of time, but you're absolutely right. So there is the requirement. I mean, whether you're using school children or members of the public, actually members of the public can be a real mix of people with huge expertise and people with no expertise. So the question of validation is really important. I would argue the question of validation of any science is really important. So citizen science is unique in that context. So I think we just need to think of it as not like a fatal flaw of citizen science, but just something about doing the scientific method really effectively. And also I'd say in that paper I talked about we talked about some of the possible options for thinking about increasing the accuracy of those data points. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So our next speaker is Eliana Teixeira. She is a marine benthic ecologist at the University of Aveiro, specialized in environmental assessment and tracking invasive species marine invasive species. So welcome, Eliana.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm going to talk about a practical example which integrates very well with the previous talks. I hope you feel so. So I'm going to talk to you about exploring actual citizen science platform data for early detection of invasive species and using computer vision tools. And I'm going to focus on a coastal species, so it's a marine species, this little gastropod, a limpet. And things are changing fast for ecologists, sometimes a bit faster than we can keep on. And one of the great developments is this new AI, all tools, machine learning, computer vision models. And it's making us learn new skills and try to think how we can adapt and incorporate these new technologies to our ecological and conservation challenges. And on the same hand, these new technologies are also providing us a lot of data, much more data than we are used to. We are always complaining that we don't have enough data in ecology, so now we have a lot of data. And how do you process all that data? And citizen science platforms are one good example of being generated a huge amount of data with all the implications that Michael already spoke about, the biases, but still a lot of potential to explore. And on the other hand, we also have, for example, very important in the marine environments, new tools that can deliver a lot of data for unknown environments like the deep sea or other less accessible areas that generate also a lot of images that are our new monitoring samples, let's say, and new video footages. So trying to look at these two new reality and new challenges that we face, there was this Alien CSI cost action that just finished, and that was trying to look at the potential of citizen science data to try to increase our understanding of invasive alien species. And in a hackathon that we organized to try to find ways to mobilize that data and information faster and better, we came up with this little idea to try to apply this to one species. So I was working in Portugal in a coastal lagoon, and we were actually tracking another invasive species, and we by chance encountered a new one. And this invasive species that we first thought was a juvenile of the previous one, then we started looking further and we realized it was a new one, and it had at home only been given for Spain in the entire Europe. It had been entered into these Galician rias through aquaculture, Mytilide aquaculture that were imported from Chile according to the records, and this was in 2005, and we found that in 2019 in Portugal. So when we went to, this is from last year, from JBIF, it hasn't changed much of this year. It has a couple more records. I was a bit scared in Greece, I think Italy, and the UK, I think, one. But it was, then I went to see, it was just a museum collection, digitized and not necessarily from that. So the picture is still more or less this one. So it is an early invader in Europe, and it was early detection in Portugal, we thought so. And but it's a very small species. It's not easy to see, it's not easy to spot, and it poses challenges. So we were trying to understand a bit more of the species. It thrives very well in estuarine environments. It's a gregarious, protoandric species, hermaphrodite, and it lays the eggs. So this is each sac of these that you see is one of these, and each of these, it's this. So the female lays the eggs, then embryonic development is hidden, so it's protected, it decreases the death rates, and although it has not a pelagic larval stage that could facilitate dispersal, it still reduces the death rates a lot, and then it produces. So it's really a potential for invasion. And when we start to look at in the region, we're trying to understand with the local fishermen if they have had problems. And in Galicia, because there are heavy Mytilide aquaculture, mussels aquaculture, they already started to have some problems. In Portugal, where this study started, it was a small-scale fishery, natural mussel banks, so we already had the reporting with the interviews that we did with the local fishermen that some bags of some harvests had been rejected because they were with this thing that they didn't know what it was, and they had to clean it before they could be accepted. So it started to also pose the question that it's still not yet very present, but it already starts to have some economic impact besides, as you can see, the biodiversity, the impact on the biological communities, because I think this guy has trouble opening, and he's a filter feeder, so he should be able to open without problem. So when we were thinking of this individual for using computer vision models, it posed some challenges. So it's not a very charismatic species, so we won't find a lot of them easily, even if we are looking for them, and we certainly won't find very dedicated targets in citizen science platforms, because it's not a blue feather parrot. It's not, no one wants to. So very few records were found, even in the native ranges. So we couldn't find records in terms of images, I'm saying. So that was a limitation to use a computer vision model, or to train one, which was our idea. And so we thought, okay, why don't we look for the basibionts instead? Because it's a very common species. I'm sure it will have a lot of images, and even in citizen science platforms. So our strategy was, so those species in our region that we realized that were the 90% of the basibionts that they were encountered, very small in litter rocks or other litter in the beach. So most of them are really well spread in Europe. So I guess you could see the potential for these species also to colonize many of our coastal environments. So we started playing. There are a lot of computer vision models. I'm not going to delve into that. It's an entire new talk. You can compare, play with different ones. Our idea here was just to try to make this as a validation case. Would it be an avenue? And we decided to take one that we could customize. The first version we played with was the YOLO V4 through the Google Cloud. And more recently now we tried the YOLO V11, the lightest model, and we can run it in our own computer through Conda4. So it's something that even an ecologist, marine benthic ecologist like me can do. So I don't say you should do it alone, but it's something that we can start making the case for this. And we trained it in some images to predict. And the idea was to train a new classifier and then to look for it in the basibionts. And it's a pity I forgot to put a paper, but I will upload it in Blue Sky after the talk, which is there is a huge potential, besides the species that are posted in iNaturalist or other science platforms that are the target ones, there is a huge load of information in each picture. So this what we call the secondary data. And our idea was to explore that. So what is in this secondary data that is not the target of the posted observation, but is the thing that can answer our questions. And in our case, it was the basibionts. So if we could search for the database in the mussel beds that were out there posted, maybe we could, with our computer vision model, track also our target species that was not reported or not the main target of the report, and therefore not in the metadata. So our first attempt with very few images was very funny. And that's what happened, because we were happy it could detect. We're so happy. And then we said, no, let's put some images, just hair circles. And so it can also detect berries and beetles with a very high confidence that is our target. So it is not very precise. So we said, okay, we understand nothing of computer vision, so how should we build our data train? And I think this is where the ecological knowledge and all our experience comes, is very valid. So we start thinking of these things, and then we went on the field, but as I told you, there were not many. So I grabbed the students, we went to a dedicated BioBlitz, we collected 200 and something individuals in that mussel bank that we knew there were. We did this also control action, side effect, and we collected many of them. I also took a lot to the laboratory. We took a lot of pictures in the field, different lights, all the computer vision tips that they gave, and also some artificial ones in the lab turned upside down, every light, and so we can increase. And the results, we labeled everything annotation with the bounding boxes using the label EMG software. And then we had a much more balanced data set, and we increased a new class. So the juveniles, we were super confident. Okay, let's put in juveniles, let's complicate. And so just the preliminary results, just to give us some thought. So we still have much more classes, the adults here, very few juveniles, and we also included this bottom view of the shell, because it can also appear turned down in the dead shells pictures. And this is an error, this should be swept, this is adults and here bottom, sorry, it was small, I had to increase and then switch it. So the nice thing here is that it can actually predict very well the adults and also the bottom view of the shell. And this is a good result. But there we have some problem with the background, so a lot of false positives. And when we are looking at this, and also all the juveniles were characterized as adults anyway. So it's true that the difference between a juvenile and an adult within all our samples, it's not bigger than between an adult shell that is alive or dried in the debris. So we probably should be merging these, and the results would be much higher because there's a lot of error coming from something that it's not gaining information. And I put here the recall, not the full precision. The recall is a true positive rate. And if we think in early detection of invasions, we want our model to be able to detect something. I don't care if it classifies something, or I don't care as much if it classifies something that it's not a limpet as a limpet, but I do want it to detect all the limpets that is there. So also thinking of how we use these measures to select the best for the best model in terms of our interest, it's also very interesting, and we are also trying to look at those things. So we have a lot to do, of course. Just I think this is the image, like Toka said, this is a funny thing to see. You see a little bit of background in here that is false positive, but actually most of them were for the individual with a validation data set was really interesting. So we're considering some improvements here, of course. The representatives of the samples, the classes, the background detection, and then our idea is also to use the test validation data set. I already saw, for example, since we collected all the data, there are already 200 observations in iNaturalist we could use as a test data set, and then go after those secondary data with the mussel beds. Yeah, and yeah, thank you very much. These are the authors that accompanied this bunch.
Thank you so much, Eliana. So we have time for one quick question. Okay, there, please.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. It was really awesome. I just wanted to know regarding the model that you chose, the framework. Do you have like any reason to pick YOLO V11 over other ones, or how did you select this one?
No, well, 2 years ago when we started playing with this, we had tested the YOLO because it was, we were in this hackathon, we could work with the cloud, we hadn't thought about any, with the institution using our high computer available at the institution. So that was a thing that we could implement quickly. And now we were also doing these small exercises. So I can control everything because I can run this from my computer and it's no problem, it still has the power. But of course, if you start working with more data, and you want to build these workflows, you should compare other models, and then you will need another type of high computer performance that it's not based on our single laptop. Yeah, that was just focus on the ecology still part, and not the computer vision models itself.
So thank you, Eliana, for this very interesting presentation. Our next speaker is Pierre Courtois. He is an environmental economist from the French National Research Institute for Agriculture and Environment, working on invasive species and plant epidemic management. Thank you, Pierre.
But it's not the right presentation. It's... Yeah, I have no clue what I should do with this. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So in fact, it's not on the screen. It's just here.
Okay.
There's no. Ah. Okay, no way. It doesn't matter much. Okay, so I need the mic. Ah, perfect. So as you know, I'm an economist, and I try to work on invasive species management. And basically, in fact, all this project started with, we had these big questionnaires with park managers in France, and we were trying to understand how they were managing the invasive species, if they had rules, if they know existing tools, and so on. And we understood from these big questionnaires that, in fact, they didn't really use existing tools, but they had lots of data. So they were collecting lots of data and not making much use of it. So I'm a bioeconomic modeler. So the main question we had was, but could we do something for these people? Can we imagine to build the theoretical, it's crafts. So it's the theoretical part of a tool in order to help them manage the invasive species in their environment. So the context, I don't need to go back on it very much. In fact, there's an increasing number of invasive species, increasing costs. Hélène talked about this very well. But budgets are very limited, and this leads to prioritization. Maggior Chenal distinguished species, pathways, and sites prioritization. So which species to target in priority, which pathways to target in priority, and which sites to target in priority. This question of priority is obviously about cost effectiveness, so taking into account the fact that budgets are limited. But obviously, if you think about building a tool, prioritization can be aimed at many different things. It can maximize biodiversity values. It can maximize ecosystem services. It could minimize cost, could minimize spreads. In fact, you can make many different tools. I focused on two kinds of prioritization protocols. The first is on species, and the second is on sites. The two are quite related in their philosophy, so I just focus on presenting you the site idea, just to give you a flavor of what an economist can do about all this. So in fact, I'm working with regional parks, so I've got a regional park here, and you've got an invasive species spreading into it. And the thing is that the management cost of this species is often very heterogeneous in space. Benefit from control, be it biodiversity benefit or economic benefit, is very heterogeneous in space as well, and you've got spread. So in fact, you've got these three components, and from these three components, you can make many different criteria. So I present you one today, and the key of it was, and the key of this paper was just to try to define the theoretical basis of a criterion and to implement it in the field in order to see if it works and if we could really define something easy to be used by managers on this basis. So I explain you very, very fast how it works technically. So in fact, the key question is allocation. This is X. I present you the model, but very fast, it's very easy to understand. So in fact, you take a natural area, you divide it in n distinct small areas, and then your aim is to allocate efforts. So we will remove an invasive species, okay? So I will maximize a net benefit. I will talk about this later. And one thing very, very important in this project, we built it in coordination with one manager. In fact, we are deciding at year T for results to be obtained in T+1. It's not a long-term thing, okay? So you need to start by understanding dynamics, and we model dynamics in a very, very simple way. So in fact, the abundance of the species, so again, it's a vector. So the abundance of the species in the different areas of my park depends on the abundance we had in period T, minus how much you removed in period T. And obviously, there's a transition matrix because the invasion is spreading. So if you take off, if you control the invasive species in area I, obviously the prevalence of the species will be reduced in area I, but it will be reduced also in all areas connected to I. But this is your word. What we do is, this is the basis of the criterion. What we do is that we maximize, in fact, the benefit from control. So my control variable is the allocation of effort in space, okay? And this effort will impact a quantity of invasive species, and this will give you a benefit. Obviously, if you control in area I, you will get benefits in area I, but you will get benefit in areas connected to I. And when you maximize this, obviously you've got your budget constraint, the economic part of it, and I have a budget constraint of G, and this is my management cost function. So in the paper, we define a criterion, we define a math method in order to solve this thing easily, but I don't go into this right now. But you can do it. So I turn now to the application to see whether this kind of criterion could be used in a park. So I took a regional park. This is Bruyère Marchland. It's on the west coast of France. So it's 55,000 hectares. And in this park, there's many invasive species, and the most worrisome is primrose willow. So primrose willow is there since 1994. It's spreading, it's controlled since 1999. And something amazing about this area is that we've got lots of data, lots of SIG data on prevalence of the species of a space, but also on control costs. So it was very nice for us. And actually, there's many, many places in France where there's this kind of data. So if we want to use this kind of tool elsewhere in France, this is quite easy. Abroad, I don't know. So they've got a budget. Basically, they spend 120,000 euros every year to control this invasive species, so which has lots of impact, economic impact, but also biodiversity impacts. Those biodiversity impacts are very difficult to measure. And so I will mainly focus on these. So we divided the park into 25 areas. So in fact, there's 5 main regions, sorry, in the park. We divided in sub-regions, so 25 regions in total. And as you notice, in fact, we've got lots of nice data on spread, lots of nice data on control costs, but no data on benefits. And what we thought was to measure the preference of people, whether inhabitants of this park had preferences whether to control the invasion in one area or the other. So we did this, this is called a choice experiment. So we tried to assess the preferences of people for management in this park. And so we showed them how it was right now, or it would be in 5 years if we don't do anything, okay? This is invasion levels, very rough manner. And then we submit them this choice set. So they have 8 choice sets like this, and each time they need to make 3 choices. From this, you can infer preferences. In fact, this is willingness to pay. So they are willing to pay, for instance, 11 euros in region 1 to move from an intermediate invasion level to a low invasion level. Cardinal value is not very important to me here. What I was interested in is ordering. So I wanted to know whether they preferred one area than another. And this is what shows this table, is that in fact you're willing to pay 3 times more for region 2 and 3 than for region 5, okay? So there's very big heterogeneity in preferences. I turn to the other modules, and I will go faster on these. The control cost. As I said, we had lots of data, so we played a lot with this data, and it turned out that the best estimates were on linear cost functions. So the management of primrose willow is a linear cost function, and we had to distinguish wet and dry areas, but I don't need to go into this. In fact, it's much cheaper to treat wet areas than dry areas. But main results were that, in fact, wherever you go in the park, it costs basically the same to control the invasive species. There's no much lower cost in one area than in other. It's just cheaper to do it in wet areas. About diffusion, this is the same equation that what we had at the beginning, but there's fixed effect. It doesn't matter much. We had a very good estimate. I was really impressed by this, of the simulation of this spreading within the park. So in fact, we estimated this, and now we've got the 3 modules. I can move to my results. So in fact, as soon as you've got the benefit, the cost, and the spread, you can use my criterion. And I take a year. Here I take the year 2019, where in fact we had much more prevalence of the invasive species, much more biggest densities of the invasive species in the south. And I apply the criteria. And what you see is that if you've got only 120,000 euros, this criteria tell you only one thing. You should control this invasive species in region 2 and 3. And you should forget about the invasion in the other regions. Another result is that if you want to completely remove this invasion, you don't need 120,000 euros, you need 1 million. But even if you put 1 million, you won't see primrose willow there anymore, but it will come back the year afterward anyway. Okay? So behind this choice, there's obviously the fact that they value so much region 2 and 3. But it's not only this, because obviously we wanted to know what was driving this prioritization of choices. And so it's stuck. Okay, so we played with the algorithm considering that it was the same benefit everywhere. So it turns out to be minimization of spread under a budget constraint. And if you minimize spread under a budget constraint, same thing with 120,000 euros. You need to target these regions 2 and 3. And why? It's not because of benefits here, because benefits are all the same in this scenario, but it's just because the south is so invaded that it acts as a reservoir. And the invasive species is spreading from there. It's the reason for this needs to be targeted. And my key message are two. In fact, if you want to use this kind of tools, this is one tool, but we can make many of these. It's feasible to use it, but obviously if you want to use it and let managers to do it by themselves, we need to work a lot on inventory methods because we had to work a lot on their data to fit this criterion. And the main work is not to build the algorithm, to build the criterion. The main work is how to collect data for this kind of work to be usable by managers. And this is it.
Thank you. Thank you, Pierre. So we can have one quick question if anyone.
Okay, thank you. So I was thinking, when you ask people to select the areas, what do you think drove their choice?
So, in fact, I didn't talk about this, but in the paper we really analyze why they chose this area. And so you've got all these answers in this paper. And in fact, they choose this area mainly because this is the cultural value of this park. And they all know it. So they want this to be preserved, because if you let this invasive species spread completely there, then it won't be accessible and they will lose the whole cultural value of it. But obviously, it was other things. So we played with how distant they were from the area, and it plays a role. So we can see that the further you live from the area, the less you pay, or the less you prefer. Yeah. Because pay is not necessarily the right word. And this is the two main ingredients explaining this.
Do you think it could affect a bit the outcome of the model in the prioritization? Could you, for example, try to use an indirect tool to select the area like ecosystem services? So people preferring them, it doesn't matter where, and then you optimize with your maps where they are best to live or where the impact of the invasive species would affect less, and then it would be a more unbiased and fair distribution of the...
Yeah,
that
it's a
be?
good idea.
It could fit your model.
Yeah, definitely. There's many. I've got many ideas. We could also, this is an idea. This is a good idea. And I'm thinking about maximizing a biodiversity index. And this would allow you to prioritize for biodiversity per se and not for services, which would be very complementary. But the thing is that to use this biodiversity index, you need to understand survival probabilities of species and how primrose willow is affecting all the others. And this is, in fact, we don't have the database to do that. If not, I would have done that, but it's not available. Yeah, it's data problem, it's said.
Okay, Pierre, thank you so much, and let's move. So next up is Nuno Mota. He's a PhD student at CBO also, and he is working with remote sensing and landscape ecology. So welcome, Nuno. Yeah, it's not this one.
Yeah. I think it's the next one. Maybe they put the timing wrong. Okay, that's the one. Thank you so much, Eva. So I'm here to talk a little bit of remote sensing and how this can be used to detect invasive alien plant species and create also automatic detection systems that can help us management our territories. So on this talk, I will go briefly to the remote sensing. I will give two examples of how we can use remote sensing in a terrestrial and aquatic realm to detect invasive alien species, and also a management system that we develop with a broader group, but where we use the knowledge gathering in the previous works to create a easy way to give results to decision makers and policy makers. So we don't look to Earth from space too long ago, 60, 70 years, but since then some very things have changed a lot. We jumped from small radiometric measures to video, a Carbonite UK satellite, and last week we launched Sentinel-1 seed. It's a radar Sentinel, radar satellite that gives us a lot of information. So remote sensing is highly used on the invasive species detections. It's increasingly being used, and this is because we have a lot of new platforms. We have computation algorithms that improve our data, and also remote sensing data is being a lot used in the distribution modelings of species. How it works? Really easy. We have the sunlight. It hits the Earth surface. Some is absorbed, some is reflected. The one that is reflected is measured by the satellites, and we can understand what is under the surface, depending on the reflected energy. So if we understand what we are looking for, we can find it. So to find what we want, we need to first understand the satellite requirements. We need to understand what we are looking for. We need to understand if the satellite that we are using, the information that we are using, is the one that will give us good results. And also, we need to understand where to look. We need to look for the plant traits. We need to understand where we can find the difference that will help us to identify our species. That can be on taking advantage of phenological or structural difference, also physiological difference that the plant may have from the native ones. So, species distribution models are really used in trying to understand where the invasive species may appear. How they work, we gather presence data, we correlate it with environmental variables, and we understand where are the niche, where are the ecosystems that these invasive species can occupy. But these have some downsides. We have problems with the presence data that can give us biased results. We have environmental predictors that are stable in time, and normally we have a low resolution associated with the results. But when we use spectral data, we can resolve most of these problems. So my two works that I will present here have more or less the same methodology. We go to the field, we collect presence data, we work the satellite data with DESCENT2, that is a super algorithm, resolution algorithm. We understand what are the spectral relevant aspects that we must look to detect our species, and we use the biomod2 to use the power of the algorithms inside of biomod2 to detect areas that are spectrally identical to the ones that we detect as presence. So first case, Acacia longifolia is a bush, have a really yellow flowers that is distinctive from all the others, because in the winter it has these flowers, and most of the surrounding native trees don't have flowers in the winter, in Portugal at least. So we collect presence data, also absence data. We collect Sentinel-2 time series, so we look for December to May to catch the flowering period during the winter. Because it's a winter, it's really cloud, so we don't have many images. We calculate also some vegetation index. We end up with 108 spectral variables. That's a lot of variables to include in the model, but we will reduce that, and I'll show you how. So we introduce the presence and absence data. We introduce all the spectral data in our modeling, use biomod2, and we take advantage that you have 10 different classification algorithms. We made a first round of classification, and we select only the best 17 variables, the 17 that have at least by the model, the best potential to discriminate our species. And then we proceed with the validation and with the final model. The biomod2 creates an assemble where we merge all the models that we use. The final result comes from it's a continuous result from 0 to 1000, but we can transform this in a binary result by applying the threshold, a cutoff, where below the cutoff or the threshold is not similar, the pixel that represents is not similar to the pixels that we gave as presence. And up the cutoff, it's the model considers that there are some similarities between the presence and the pixel that is being analyzed. So remember, close to 1000 really spectral is really similar. Close to the cutoff can be a little bit similar, but not so similar. And that's how we get these results. Red areas are really similar areas, and green, dark green are areas that are a little bit similar, but even so can help us to prioritize areas that we should look and think in the possible expenses that we need to have to control the species. Other work is with water hyacinth, is a free-floating species. So it's a moving target. By being a moving target, we can't use static presence areas. So what we did, we synchronized our field work with the satellite data acquisition. We went to Cabo the River on the 13th of November. We collect some areas, and we also, back in the office, we collect 1 year of Sentinel-2 imagery, and in the end we end up with 216 spectral variables. No indices, only spectral variables. To understand where we look, we study these variables, and we can see that water hyacinth have for most of the year a distinctive reflective pattern between the band 5 and the band 11 of the spectrum that we analyze. So we include in our model only these areas where we can see that water hyacinth is normally different from the surroundings. So it's the same methodology that I used before, but now instead of putting all the images at the same time, I put only one image. So I use the biomod to detect areas that are similar, close to the spectral reflectance that I registered in this period of time, and I have a finalized assemble. And what I do next is I project for the other image. I ask to the model to show me in the other dates areas that have a close spectral signature to the one that was registered on 13th of November. So in the end, we have a map of the distribution of water hyacinth on this date, but I also can have then a continuous evolution map of the water hyacinth across the time. And we can see here the typical patterns of growing during the summer, autumn, and then decreasing in the winter due to the low temperatures. And with this knowledge, we start thinking how we can improve these ideas, this knowledge that we have, because knowledge is better when it's shared and when it's accessible in an easy way to persons that don't share our knowledge. So what we did was we thought in the work that we have done, we used the spectral data that we have collected, the spectral signatures, and we implemented this in a Google Earth engine, so that a policymaker can have access in a continuous way to our data and monitor the river. So we developed this web platform called Simvaqua. How it works, it's really easy. In the beginning, the user must select all the background processing is based on random forest, but the user can choose between using a spectral signature capture on June or capture in November, or a mix of the two spectral signatures. Then is asked to show to draw the geographic boundary to the river, and also they have the hypothesis of detecting only one moment or try to see the evolution. If he goes for one moment only, we can say he is asked to put the starting data and the ending data. We also ask some questions about the cloud cover, and in the end he will have a result like this. The red dots, it's areas that are spectral similar to water hyacinth on the river for that moment that the policy maker, let's say the stakeholder, wants to analyze. But if he wants to see evolution, we did like this. We asked for the starting date, how many days he wants between each image, how many images he wants to be generated, also the percentage of clouds, and it should be starting. It's moving. Yeah, because it's changing. Okay, this should be a moving video, and you can see across the time the different points of water hyacinths moving. Yeah. Yeah, it takes a little bit. Yeah. So you can see it works. So conclusions. Remote sensing can be very helpful to understand the dispersion of the invasive alien species in our territory. We can use assembled models to create really accurate predictions of where these species are, and we can integrate this knowledge in open source platforms like Google Earth Engine to enhance the accessibility of these how I can say, these applications. So in the end, the sentence that I want you to take home is you can't manage what you don't measure. So I think with this we can measure a lot of things and can start measuring. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Nuno. So does anyone have a quick question? I guess Eliana.
Yeah, it's coming.
Thank you. So Nuno, have you tried to detect these outside the area where you trained your models for the
That is part of my PhD.
Ah, okay.
So in 2 years I have the answer.
Okay, good. That's good. So I will be curious to know. Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good presentation.
Okay, thank you, Nuno, for the presentation. We will move now to the last presentation that will wrap up our thematic session. So Eva is a PhD student at CBio, and she is working with the impacts of invasive alien species on ecosystem services.
So, hello everyone. So, me and Joanna actually organized this thematic session in this topic because we are currently in our team, it aligns with the research we are pursuing. And so we decided to wrap this up with kind of an overview and also showcase some of the projects of our team. So, of course, managing biological invasions is complex. They are embedded in the socio-ecological system. And so there are some challenges with understanding them better, the drivers, the process, mechanisms, interactions, keeping track of them so we can make efficient decisions, and also having good monitoring networks, and also the decision-making process itself that should integrate values and local communities, and in an attempt to kind of make more sustainable decisions. And so, of course, we have a lot of accumulated knowledge already, but it gets to a point that that accumulated knowledge might not make sense. And so there is this avenue for research synthesis to help us aggregate evidence and also and better understand what has already been made, and also gaps in knowledge. And we are kind of in an age of systematic reviews. I bet many of you have done some in one way or another. And if so, you know that it's a very time-consuming process and sometimes mentally exhausting. But as we are talking about tools and technologies, there are some studies going on applying large language models to kind of turn unstructured data from research papers into structured data that we can use, and turn that into workflows. And so maybe someday we'll have an AI research assistant for this, which I actually asked ChatGPT to imagine itself as a research assistant, and here are some of his ideas. So models are the mother tool to study the world and reality, and so they allow us to represent the systems, the components of the systems, the interactions within the systems, and they can be more data-driven correlative models and relationships, or more process-based causal relationships. Scenarios are also increasingly relevant to use as they allow us to kind of account for uncertainty and explore possible futures, and in a world of constantly increasing global change, this is increasingly relevant. Of course, like the most common ones that we used are exploratory scenarios, in which, for example, the IPCC climate ones, but there are also avenues for using intervention or policy screening scenarios. And so in a systematic review in the context of the IPA's assessment on models and scenarios in invasion science, of course, the most common ones were correlative models and exploratory scenarios. So there is kind of this opportunity to explore other approaches and use them for invasive species to better understand the system. And so, to exemplify this, I will talk to you about this work from one of our PhD students in our group, Cristina Lima. She's studying the interaction of Acacia delbata, which is the species not talked about, in forest fires. This is a very relevant case study for Portugal, and she applied some of these underused approaches. So in her current work, she's doing a dynamic model of these acacia fire interactions, and so with this, we can kind of represent these sub-models in which you have the invasive species population dynamics and how it interacts with fire events and how that interacts with land use changes, and they are kind of interacting with each other. And then you can model this we used Stella software, which is actually an interesting software for ecologists that don't want to deal too much with the mathematics, as we just need to work on the conceptual model and the data. And then you can basically analyze your relevant variables through time. So, for example, population dynamic variables, or even the site susceptibility to invasion by the species. And also these kinds of models are able to represent stochastic phenomena, so in this case random fire events, feedback loops, so how land use influences the site proneness to fire, but also how fire influence land use, and then also emergent behaviors. And so, for example, in this case, we can calculate site susceptibility to invasion through the system and the model interaction with the submodels, basically. In another work, and this one is published, she implemented some what we call policy screening scenarios. So these were scenarios of fire suppression, low fire suppression, the current fire suppression effort, or high fire suppression. And this, with other kinds of scenarios, then you do species distribution models and you get information that acknowledges that this kind of management and how management can influence the species and make more comprehensive decisions regarding that. Of course, as for keeping track of them, we are also in an age of opportunity. Data gathering is evolving through sensors, diverse sensors, and also community science, but also the data processing itself. We have more ability to do so with artificial intelligence, deep learning. And so, Nuno already talked to you about how we can use remote sensing for detection, and particularly this relevance of transferring these approaches to user-friendly platforms that are easy to use by decision makers. In another work, he implemented a similar methodology, but for disease transmission risk. And so with presence of the host species and the disease, and then using spectral data as a proxy for habitat suitability and the distribution models, and then with a matrix, a risk matrix, kind of identify these places where risk of transmission is higher. And so this is kind of a tool that can use, also has potential to be used to inform biosecurity policies. So another PhD student, Sofia Cardoso, she's studying the potential of social media data for kind of as biodiversity observations. And in this case, for invasive species, she used the pampas grass, which has kind of these iconic plumes and is a very also kind of increasing species in Portugal. And so she applied deep learning models. She first collected images from citizen science, then she labeled the images, implemented the models, they had the good accuracy, and then she used them on social media images and mapped those occurrences. And in fact, there was some new occurrences that were detected through the use of the social media data, which kind of also demonstrates its potential as biodiversity observation data. In another work, she also applied this kind of methodology, in this case, not invasive species, but she was exploring also the use of online images and digital data to monitor species trade. In this case, it was pangolins, and she collected images of them in commerce contexts and tried to see if the models would be able to identify them. And they also had good accuracy, so demonstrating that potential. So even applying this to invasive species, the ones that make sense to use, maybe we can also here develop these automated alert systems for trade and for particular important species. And so technologies, in fact, are helping us a lot in making decisions, but then we have this thing about humans that are very mysterious and diverse. And so we have to kind of be aware of this, try to understand how these values and perceptions can also be integrated into decision making. And so this is also the opportunity and to use kind of social sciences methods in ecology. So, for example, participatory mapping, that you work with stakeholders and local communities to identify local values, but also potential vulnerable areas to specific risks, in this case with more climate change, but can also be applied to invasive species. Also, we have this master student, Maria, that she's working with sports fishermen, and she's not only trying to understand their knowledge and perception, but also their willingness to manage the species. So when they do, because they do it for sports, but if they are willing to then not return them or and so participate in the control. And here some preliminary results were actually interesting, that demonstrating some age importance for the people. So older fishermen are more aware and also more willing to participate. And also, kind of in the same vibe, applying this to digital data again. So this is an emerging field, culturomics, in which we try to understand human behavior and perception in digitalized data, so using those natural language processing models. And so we also have a master's student that's working on this, and we had data from Twitter when it was still called Twitter for a certain time period in which we had extracted tweets that mentioned invasive alien species, but also another set that mentioned pests. And it was collected for the Iberian Peninsula in Spanish, Portuguese, and English tweets. And so she did some data cleaning to take off the irrelevant tweets, and she's applying sentiment analysis models. And so this allows us to kind of understand perceptions and sentiments towards these groups of keywords, but that represent our study target, and understand these perceptions online that despite not being representative of the whole population, obviously, maybe can help us in making targeted education campaigns online, or even just understanding how the online public sphere kind of works. And so, yeah, with challenges comes opportunity, and we have been kind of working across these multiple dimensions and fields, and with different approaches to kind of tackle these different dimensions of managing invasive species. And so, yeah, I want to thank my team that trusted me to present their works here, and also Joanna, and thank you all for listening, and that's it.
Thank you, Eva, for wrapping up this session and also presenting our team here in the conference. We have time for 2 questions, I think.
Yeah, maybe we can have lunch.
I think we don't have online questions.
Thank you for wrapping this session up very well, nicely summarized. As well as using AI to analyze data, we're now seeing AI being used to create text data and create images. Now, if we're looking at data from images and text from the media, how would we be able to ignore that data? Because that could cause a lot of issues for the reliability of the data that we're using.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm not the expert, so maybe someone more expert in this can debate that, but these are kind of the limit. It's opportunities to use digital data, but also has a lot of limitations, and also with data, what you mentioned, but also privacy. There are a lot of things to think about. And of course, we have to be aware of that. And yeah, I think that problem that you identified will be kind of tricky, but I don't know, let's see. Let's see if we can tackle that also with other technology.
No? Okay, so I think we are done. Thank you so much for being here, and we hope you like these discussions. Thank you.